Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, getting into our must-start and must-sit wide receivers as we head into Week 15 of fantasy football, and for a lot of us, the first week of our fantasy playoffs. If you're still watching these videos, congratulations. Let's go win you a fantasy championship. We'll be breaking down every single game this week to help you set your lineups. If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button for me. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're new. We'll have more fantasy content to get you ready for the rest of the season, and we'll have some more NFL content coming until the Super Bowl. But let's jump into these matchups for Week 15. Saturday, love that we got a 3-game slate on Saturday football the entire weekend. We're starting with the Vikings at the Bengals. We've got a Vikings team going to Nick Mullins at quarterback, Josh Dobbs all the way to the third string spot. I mean, a tough look for Dobbs, but also what a roller coaster of a season he's had so far. Bengals, of course, running it with Jake Browning for the remainder of the season. Backups, man. Backups everywhere. But for this Vikings defense, they have shaped up a fair bit, especially with Flores. Just being the DC has helped them a ton. They have one of the higher coverage grades in the league, but they do blitz a lot and send a lot of numbers when they're rushing the passer. That's going to be something for Browning to pay attention to see how successful he can be. He has been very successful so far this season. When I was looking at some of the numbers, especially yards per attempt wise, his receivers have done a great job after the catch and generating plays. So the Vikings, much better against the run than the pass, though. 19th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, so there is something to be taken from there. With the Bengals, have kind of struggled defensively across the board, with some of the losses they've had in their secondary from last season. It's really hurt them quite a bit. They're now 23rd in fantasy points allowed, so a bottom 10 unit, and they're also 25th in EPA against the pass as well. So this is a team that you can move the ball through the air against. Can this Vikings team do it with Nick Mullins? We shall see. Now, Justin Jefferson expected to be back. He is someone I am going to be starting, and I mentioned this in our video last week, that Jordan Addison in this role as the third option behind TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson. He's a guy I just don't want a piece of, regardless of the matchup, to be quite honest with you guys. So last week was a bad week. I'd expect a lot of the same this week, so he's still someone I do want to sit. Didn't even really take advantage of the fact that Jefferson went down in this game either. Bengals, though, Jamar Chase has been the go-to guy for Jake Browning against the blitz this season. He's putting up some monster numbers in the small sample size we have with Browning of about 3 games. Feel very good about him. T. Higgins is someone I will play as well because I do think the Vikings will do a good job taking away the run game from the Bengals as they've done against the majority of their opponents this season. So I can feel good about playing Higgins. I would expect to see some good volume from him, but with Tyler Boyd, just too much here. In terms of people having a share of the pie when it comes to this offense, and Joe Mixon's involvement in the receiving game, that Boyd doesn't really enter the conversation for me. Next, we go to Steelers at the Colts. We've got a Colts defense that has gotten Grover Stewart back. Going to be a little bit more improved against the run in my mind, and so far this season, been pretty middle of the road in all of categories when it comes to run or pass. They're a pretty replaceable level team. 14th in fantasy points allowed, 14th in EPA. As for the Steelers, they have improved quite a bit. Getting Minkah Fitzpatrick on the field more has definitely helped. They're now a top 10 defense in pass EPA. So definitely not an easy matchup here for the Colts in their passing game with Gardner Minshew, and then the Steelers going with Mitch Trubisky. So with your Steelers wide receivers, do feel good about Deontay Johnson. He was very quiet in the early parts of the Patriots week, but did, by the end of the game, put together a pretty serviceable fantasy performance for you. He still, to me, is the top option in this offense. Pickens' average depth of target last week was just 3 yards. That's a little bit concerning because his, bread and butter is those downfield opportunities, which he did not get last week. With Trubisky at quarterback, becomes a little bit more concerning. Johnson is that wide receiver 4 type of player for me, so fringe of being a guy to sit, but for me, for right now, I do think he could be a decent start for you. As for the Colts, it's really just Michael Pittman. He's been pretty dominant in his target share the last couple of weeks. I can't really trust Alec Pierce, who gets in the field a ton, but does not demand target share whatsoever. He has one of the lowest target rates in the highest, or in the league, and the highest route participation. Not a good mix. And then Josh Downs has been pretty, pretty underwhelming, I guess I would say. A consistent underwhelming the last 3-4 weeks as well. So he's not someone that's really on my radar with this particular matchup. Broncos at the Lions. Feeling really good about what the Lions can do offensively in this game. On the ground, how much will they get out of their passing game? Because now the Broncos are actually a top 10 unit in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Still one of the worst coverage grades in the NFL, though, from PFF. So definitely don't think this is a great defense, but teams are looking to run the ball on them more than they are throwing the ball on them, which makes a ton of sense. For the Broncos, though, this is a good opportunity for their passing game and for Russell Wilson. Wilson could be a decent streamer for you this week. Right now in the season, the Lions are 24th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 27th in EPA against the pass as well. So these numbers here tell you that this is a Broncos team that could move the ball through the air pretty well because the run defense is also very good for the Lions. So throwing the ball, we'll see probably at a higher volume than typical from Wilson and this Broncos team. With the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be someone I'm consistently starting every week. Josh Reynolds, I mentioned it last week that I think he could potentially have a decent game. He did. Doesn't mean I'm going to go back to him here because, again, the Broncos are more of a team that's poor against the run, whereas last week the Bears were really good against the run. That's why we saw a little more passing volume. Jameson Williams, not consistent enough to be able to play. With the Broncos, Jerry Jeudy's been someone I've been afraid to tell you to start for the majority of this season. I do feel pretty decent about him this week because, like I mentioned in that matchup, I think the passing volume will raise, and you might see Jeudy getting closer to like 8 targets in this game than his usual like 4 to 6. And then for Sutton, just a consistent red zone option, a consistent downfield creator as well, big play creator. I would definitely look to be playing him, as you have been for the last number of weeks. All right, moving to Sunday. Chiefs at the Patriots. A Chiefs team looking to get things back on track. We'll see what they do here because the Patriots are a team that have been quite good against the run. They're also missing Isaiah Pacheco. So building this lead in this game could actually come through their passing attack because, again, coverage grade really low here, 63.1 from PFF, 20th in fantasy points allowed and EPA against the pass. So good opportunity here for the Chiefs to move the ball through the air, where the Patriots are actually the number 1 defense in rushing EPA this year. So passing the ball is definitely a way to build your lead against New England. And that's for New England with the offense. Looks like we're going to get Demario Douglas back. Will we get Devontae Parker? Will we get Juju Smith-Schuster? Those guys have been practicing in a limited fashion, so I would expect to see them play. But the Chiefs, a top 10 unit in fantasy points allowed, 2 wide receivers on the season, and the number 4 defense in EPA against the pass as well. So definitely something to keep in mind here. Can definitely limit those outside wide receivers as they've done all season. So a unit that is definitely very, very good and will be tough here for this New England team, even at home in this game. What I think stands out to me, though, is I do think the Patriots really like Demario Douglas and do see him as the top option in this offense. And again, as the Patriots team, I think is going to be trailing for pretty much the entirety of this game and will have to probably lean on the pass a little bit more because of that. So Douglas is a player that was right on the precipice of being someone I wasn't going to be starting, but I do see the injuries here piling up with the Patriots and the potential of no Parker or Juju. That could really help him as well. If those guys are out, feel a lot better. Still feel like he could be a decent back end. If you're in a 2-flex league, could see you starting him this week. With the Chiefs, pretty much consistent every week for me now. Rashee Rice, great play. His route participation was the highest of his career last week, which is exactly what you want to see. He's been someone that when he's on the field, demanding targets, but just could get on the field more. We saw him do that last week. Definitely like him heading into this week against the Patriots. Pass defense, like we talked about, but the rest of these guys, not consistent enough, not reliable enough in your must-win week at the first week of the fantasy playoffs. Jets at the Dolphins. The Jets have been one of the best pass defenses in the NFL, the number 1 team in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on the season. But we saw this Dolphins team when they played not too long ago, Black Friday, they were still able to score points, still being able to put numbers up on the board. I think that's no different here. Can we see Zach Wilson take his performance from last week against Houston, carried into this one against Miami? We saw Tennessee put up a number of points in that fourth quarter. Can that be something we look to see from the Jets as well? Can they replicate that? Wilson looked very good coming back for that matchup, especially in some pretty tough weather as well. But on the season, the Dolphins have been a pretty elite unit, top 10 in pass rush, top 10 in coverage grade, top 10 in EPA against the pass. So definitely not an easy matchup by any means. But it still keeps me in the same boat here. Wilson's performance really fell off with Tim Boyle or Trevor Siemian. But with Zach Wilson, he is hyper-targeted in this offense. I think he had 12 targets last week and 9 receptions. So Wilson's still someone I can play. Gives me a really high floor when it comes to that receiving the volume of the receptions. And something that I think in this matchup will be no different, even with the difficult matchup against, a Jalen Ramsey-led secondary. With the Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. If Tyreek Hill plays, definitely going to be starting him here. Jalen Waddle, been pretty consistent the last couple weeks as well. Bears at the Browns. I know we're holding an injury designation on DJ Moore. Didn't practice early in the week, has gotten on the field. I would expect him to play, and if he does, should be a great opportunity for him, which we'll get into in a little bit. But the Browns are a really good defense. We all know that. I think top 4 in fantasy points allowed, the number 1 defense in pass EPA this season. So something to look out for these other players when it's a Darnell Mooney or a Cole Kmet. Very tough to move the ball offensively against this team. And we'll see how Justin Fields can handle this pass rush from the Browns. That's also one of the best in the NFL. That'll be really important in this game. And then for the Browns offense, you're going to see a team here that will need to lean on the pass game a little bit more. What are they? 28th in EPA against the pass are the Bears. I mentioned that I think the Bears are a really solid run defense, but have struggled against the pass this season. That's where you're going to find your opportunities to score points. And Joe Flacco, these receivers can definitely take advantage of that. I know David Njoku's been missing a little bit, but they have mentioned that it was heel, but also just a little bit of rest as well. Or was it knee? I can't remember. Same goes for Cooper, but I think both of these guys will play in this game. So for Cooper, definitely someone I want to start. Moore was a guy that, I could see he's pretty much in a similar boat to a guy like Demario Douglas. I think Cooper will play. If Cooper doesn't play, then Moore will be a great start. But I do think that if we have Cooper, if we have David Njoku, then that makes more of the potential third option, which is a little bit concerning for me, and just not the floor could really fall out in his performance. With the Bears, DJ Moore has been great against man coverage. The Browns play the most man in the entire league. I think his yards per out run was maybe 4th in the league against man. So he'll be someone, if he does play, I'll be looking to look at his player props and see what his receiving yards number is at and probably play it. But in fantasy, love him in this particular matchup. Texans at the Titans. Man, I don't think we're getting CJ Stroud here. Actually, I think I just saw 30 minutes ago from Rappaport that he is not going to be playing in this game. He still can't get out of concussion protocol, so that puts Davis Mills in as the starter. We've seen Mills. I still believe that Mills can support, one of these receiving options because the Titans are a team you want to throw the football against. They're 25th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They've definitely really struggled to these outside guys as well. That's why if Stroud was playing in this game, this team I think could absolutely dominate. I still think Mills can do enough for them because, again, Stroud has been great, but I also think the play calling has been great for this team too and been something they've been missing for the last couple of seasons. So with the Texans, though, defensively, pretty middle-of-the-road unit as well, 21st in EPA against the pass. And for the Titans, I do think the Texans have improved to be upper half of the league run defense. So Will Levis and this passing offense will definitely still be a factor. It's not like years past where Derrick Henry has just consistently run wild on this Texans team. That could still be the case, but based on what we've seen from this defense, I don't think it'll be quite that easy. So we'll still need the passing offense in this game too. I think Nico Collins can still produce for this offense against this Texans team that has struggled to outside wide receiver, or Titans team that has struggled to outside wide receivers this year. I think Mills can do enough. We saw in the latter half of last season that when Collins was on the field, Brandon Cooks was missing time at this point. Collins was still a pretty serviceable player and can be a wide receiver 3 for you. Adjust expectations. You're not going to get, the massive 160, 150 yard performance or a couple of touchdowns. You can still get the touchdowns potentially, but I think the Texans can do enough here. And again, trust the play calling and trust just the coaching staff being far improved from one Collins has had in his entire career with the Texans. So feel good about playing Collins. Brown, Woods will be guys I'm going to sit though. Not quite there without CJ Stroud. And for the Titans, continue to see Hopkins dominate the target share here with Will Levis. These guys are definitely very communicative. I think a lot of people thought that they were kind of butting heads at one point a couple weeks ago. Definitely think this is Hopkins, who had great words to say about Levis after the win over the Dolphins. These are two guys, super competitive. These are two players that definitely trust each other and working with each other quite a bit. So feel good about Hopkins here, even with the Texans being more of a middle-of-the-road defense. Giants at the Saints. The Tommy DeVito experience marches on. 3 straight wins. I don't believe that this is a game that I feel good about the Giants and their passing attack. I mentioned this in our picks video earlier this afternoon. The Saints like to play a lot of man coverage, and DeVito really struggles against man. Obviously, we don't have a full game sample size. We have the 6 games he's started so far this year. But completion percentage was below 60%. It was 5.3 yards per attempt. I don't think he has really the talent here at the wide receiver spots to be able to generate separation against man coverage and just not enough physical talent from these guys either. And the Saints, top 3 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on the season, top 10 unit EPA against the pass, one of the better coverage grades as well at 90.1. So worried about the Giants and their offense moving the ball. As for the Saints, the Giants are a team that like to blitz a ton. Derek Carr's actually been quite good against the blitz this season. He's top 10 in completion percentage and top 10 in yards per attempt. So look for this offense to still find success against this Giants defense, despite what you might think about Derek Carr as a player. But the Giants, 25th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So can definitely generate some explosive plays here and find success in the passing game too. And what that means for me is Chris Olave's someone I really like heading into this week. He's definitely a start. I know he's a little bit banged up, but I do expect him to play. Rashid Shaheed, he is saying that he's going to be coming back, making it back this week. Too risky in my mind to play him coming off the injury in obviously an ever important week. Don't think the juice is worth the squeeze here when you potentially look at a positive game script as a 6-point favorite. Could see a little bit more Alvin Kamara, could see a little bit more of the running game. As much as Carr provides a lot of value for a guy like Shaheed when Michael Thomas is out because he's such a consistent downfield passer. It's just a little bit too risky for my taste. With the Giants, I'm sitting everybody. Like I said, just don't feel there's enough talent here to be able to overcome this Saints secondary, even with Wan'Dale Robinson coming off the good week. Falcons at the Panthers. Look, the Panthers have gotten J.C. Horn back in their secondary, and they look much improved. I think it's something we have to take as real here. They're 6th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Horn had a matchup with London earlier. I don't think he played in the game this year, their earlier game this year, but he was playing in the 2 games last year and really had his way with him. I know London didn't have a huge season, but did have a pretty solid season. So I think you might get much of the same here, especially with when you look at the other receiving options being like a Daryl Hodge, Scotty Miller. There's not other than Kyle Pitts, obviously, there's not a lot here on the outside that can threaten them. So definitely expect to see Horn on London quite a bit. And you're also going to find the Falcons, a team that want to run the ball at a high rate. They're going to be able to do that effectively. The Panthers have been one of the worst run defenses in the league as well. So you should see a game script that leads to a far less passing volume, and that gives me concern here for these receivers. I think teams are only throwing the ball 29 times per game against this Panthers defense, so something for you to keep in mind when you're looking who to start. As for the Falcons, they're top 5 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I was surprised to see that, but I think they're even better against the run. And this is a Panthers team that obviously, has been sore, has just been brutal throughout the last 4 or 5 weeks here. There's a lot of opportunities they've had to win games, produce offensively, and just haven't. So I don't even know if that is enough here to make any of these guys viable options. So like I mentioned, Drake London is a guy I am going to be sitting this week. Just don't feel like the volume will be there. Feel like the floor could fall out from under him and you could get something in the low single digits potentially. I know coming off the massive week last week that's a scary proposition, but if you have some of these other options that I've talked about and liked and had positive things to say about their matchups, I would probably go with them over London. And then for the Panthers side of things, Thielen bounced back with a 70 receiving yard game on 6 receptions. So that'll be good enough. You need floor. I think Thielen can get back to giving you that because, again, run game I think could struggle here because the Panthers have been really, really good against the run. I know Jonathan Mingo's continued to get close to double-digit targets. Hasn't done anything with them. I just can't do it at this point in the season. I'd rather go to Thielen, who I feel more comfortable with his floor compared to Mingo's. Buccaneers at the Packers. The Packers coming off the brutal loss to the Giants last week on, Monday night? Yeah, Monday night. So we've got a matchup with this Bucs defense that looks to be getting a little bit more healthy. They might get Devin White and Jamel Dean back. Could still be missing Vita Vea yet again. That's something to keep an eye on. If they get these guys back, that's definitely going to help the secondary. But Bucs team likes to blitz. How will Jordan Love perform against the blitz? Because the Giants were a team that liked to blitz, and we did see some struggles. So with the Packers offense, Packers defense, sorry. The Packers are a team that are 8th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So they are someone that I think you can look to run the ball a little bit more on as opposed to finding success in the pass game. Chris Godwin can be a game time decision here. I haven't found the Bucs offense has been super efficient in the pass game lately. Has been a struggle for them. But again, for the Packers, with the Bucs and their run defense and the amount that they blitz, they're still giving up quite a bit to the pass game. What are they? 28th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So still going to find the ability to have success through the pass game here. Now, with those injuries I mentioned, or with the potential of Chris Godwin missing, even if he does play, he's been banged up. He has not played well whatsoever the last little bit here. He's someone I want to sit. Mike Evans will be someone I still do start, though, despite the matchup. The Packers, though, I really like Jaden Reed. His target share really spikes when he's seeing teams that like to blitz. Last week, he had, 7, 8 receptions in that game. Didn't put up anything really receiving yards wise, but still thought that was interesting. And then they played the Steelers and the Vikings earlier this year, and Reed had 80 plus yards in both of those games. I think he'll give you a pretty solid floor in this game. I would be comfortable starting him. The concern here is I don't think we'll see Christian Watson. I think Dontavian Wicks might be out as well. We're going to see Malik Heath. I do feel pretty good about Romeo Doubs, though, because, again, when the target share creeps down, when this is a team that you're going to struggle to run the ball against, I think we can get enough here from Doubs to be able to be a decent flex wide receiver 4 type of option. All right, 49ers at the Cardinals. I want to bring this up. I'm just looking at it through Twitter here. There were a couple of things I wanted to mention with the 49ers and their defense. Seems like there's some potential of missing some big guys here in the lineup for this game, especially on the front 4 with Tariq Armstead, Javon Hargrave, Dre Greenlaw potentially, and then also Travaris Ward working on the side field. They haven't practiced yet this afternoon because it's out on the West Coast. If they miss a lot of these guys, could make things a little bit more interesting for this Cardinals offense, especially if you take some pressure off of them with a lot of these pass rushers potentially missing. That will be something to monitor here. It could elevate some of these guys for me to feel a little bit better about. But the 49ers have been a very dominant defense this year, 7th in EPA against the pass, one of the best pass rushes in the league as well. But opponents got to throw the football against them. They're either trailing or running the ball has not been effective because this 49ers team's great against the run, a great group of linebackers as well. So they are 22nd in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on the season. For the Cardinals, struggles across the board here. They're the second worst pass defense in the league as well, and just not a lot of talent in the pass rush, so it makes things pretty easy to operate. I don't think that's going to be much different here for the 49ers. So Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, absolutely players you're going to be going to this week. I feel very confident there. With the Cardinals, it was very back and forth here. I don't know if Michael Wilson is going to play. Marquise Brown's another player that's been banged up as well. It might not play. But again, Trey McBride seems to be the number one pass catcher in this offense. There's also James Conner in the mix as well. It makes a lot of this like a guessing game. And I know Marquise Brown hit us with a really big week, but he's hit us with like that massive week of 12 targets or so, and then he's just given us nothing otherwise. I expected a lot more from Brown with Kyler Murray making his return, but it has not materialized, and I just cannot make the guess on who it's going to be. There could be value here. I just haven't been able to figure out who from the usual research that I make and just what we've seen so far this year. Commanders at the Rams. This is one of the highest totals on the week at 50.5 points, I believe, so they're expecting to see some offense and see some points in this game. I don't think we'll be seeing, or I know we won't be seeing Brian Robinson on Sunday, so that puts Antonio Gibson into the RB1 role. And I'm not so sure that the team really is a big fan of Gibson as a between the tackles runner. So we could continue to see the pass volume be really high against this Rams team, who is 26th in EPA against the pass. One of the worst coverage grades in the league. PFF just has it out for this team in terms of their grading, but in terms of fantasy points allowed, right in the middle of the league, 17th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Then for the Commanders, we know the pass defense is probably the worst in the NFL, 31st in fantasy points allowed, 32nd in EPA against the pass. So look for the Rams to find plenty of success here with their pass game. They like to play a little bit more man coverage than the rest of the league. That's usually not a great sign for Cooper Kupp, but he's coming off a really good week last week. I wouldn't expect that to be a huge issue here. I think everyone in this pass game will definitely eat. So that means Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, definitely players I want to start. Tutu Atwell, potentially returning from injury. He's not really on my radar, though. Commanders, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel. I do think you're going to see these guys being leaned upon quite a bit, like I mentioned, with the potential or with the expectation of Antonio Gibson starting in this game. So these two players are guys that have proven it. Samuel, a lot more lately, has seen some really good volume out of the slot and running more consistent amount of routes from the slot, which is super valuable in this Bieniemy offense. Those are two guys that I'm going to be looking to start. And then the one concern, Jahan Dotson, someone I'm sitting. I noticed that against zone coverage, which the Rams play a ton of, Jahan Dotson Sam Howell has thrown in 6 interceptions when targeting Jahan Dotson against zone coverage, so don't expect much from Dotson this week. Cowboys at the Bills, probably the best game of this entire Week 15 slate. Points should be aplenty in this one. This is a Cowboys team that has been very, very good defensively, kind of across the board, run and pass, but just dip out now outside of the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I think that's because of the fact that they've been in so many game scripts where teams have been looking to get back into the game and throwing the ball a ton, because on the year, top 3 in EPA against the pass. As for the Bills, a team that, defensively, numbers tell you they're an upper half of or definitely like right on the top 10 overall defensively. But when you get into these competitive games between two really good teams, honestly, even from the Cowboys' perspective, these defenses I don't think are as legit or look as good when they're playing some of these top teams. Obviously, the Bills kind of did last week against the Chiefs. These are two teams, though, that I have no concern with when it comes to being able to put up points. You get a competitive game. That's honestly, sometimes it's even better performance you're going to see from these receivers because they aren't nursing those leads. With the Cowboys, Cooper Kupp. CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks are guys I am going to be starting in this game. Michael Gallup is a player I'm sitting with also like a plethora of other options like a Jake Ferguson, like we've seen Rico Dowdle's interesting involvement, or I guess I'm thinking Devontae Turpin's involvement and how they try to manufacture opportunities for him. So Gallup hasn't really entered that tier yet for me. Gabe Davis is who we really need to talk about. Stephon Diggs, I'm starting. Davis has been pretty poor this season against man coverage, coming off a complete 0 last week, which I was really shocked to see. But he's a player that I'm going to be sitting in this matchup. Just again, floor is floor is literal zero like we saw last week, and he hasn't been great against man coverage, which the Cowboys like to play a lot of, so that is my concern. Khalil Shakir coming off the field a little bit more now with Dawson Knox getting back into the mix. They're playing their tight ends a little bit more. Shakir is just no longer consistent or serviceable for me. He was a player I bet is receiving under at 30 yards last week. Only had, I think, 12 receiving yards on the week, so avoid him. Ravens at the Jaguars. Jaguars are a 3.5-point underdog at home. We'll see how much closer to 100% Trevor Lawrence is in this game after an underwhelming game against the Browns last week. They get another tough defense in the AFC North, which is just a tough draw for this team. Because on the season, the Ravens, the number 1 defense in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, the number 2 defense in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, and the number 2 team in EPA against the pass as well. So very tough matchup here. You miss Christian Kirk for the rest of the year. These other options, Zay Jones has still been limited in practice, still dealing with that knee issue as well. Parker Washington stepping up into that slot role for this team. So there's a lot of moving parts here for the Jaguars. As for the Ravens, opportunity lies with their passing game. The Jags have done a good job against the run. I believe they're giving up about 3.9, 3.8 yards per carry, so been a pretty solid unit. And teams are looking to throw the ball quite a bit against them. Opponents are throwing the ball, I believe, close to 39 times per game against the Jags. So clear thing to expect here is passing volume from this team, and that's what's happened against this Jags team. 27th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers on the season. So what are we doing here? I like Zay Flowers, love Odell Beckham Jr. as well. He's been someone that's been great against zone. The Jags are in zone coverage the second most in the league. I'm targeting Odell Beckham Jr. with my player props as well. He had a big week last week. I think he follows that up yet again, gets on the field quite a bit because, again, like I mentioned, this is a team that you got to be throwing the ball against if you do want to put points on the board against. As for the Jaguars, Calvin Ridley, I'm going to be playing top option in this offense. I think a game where the Jaguars will struggle to run the ball as well because the Ravens are another good run defense. And I do think that Ridley being less Christian Kirk and a banged-up Zay Jones just gives him a little bit more of a clearer path to production. And then it's kind of just him and Evan Ingram being those top 2 options there. Okay, finally, Monday night. Eagles at the Seahawks. The Seahawks are a pretty short underdog in this game. The Eagles coming off the loss to the Cowboys should find some great ways to bounce back here. The Seahawks defense has not been great. 26th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I think they're a bottom 10 unit, both running backs and receivers. So something to look at here with these options you have with the Eagles. As for the Eagles team, really capable of stopping the run. Everybody's throwing the ball against them and finding a ton of success. The pass rush hasn't been nearly good enough compared to last season. They're outside the top 20 in sack rate this year, where last year they were historically maybe the best pass rush in the entire league. But, and as you can see here with their numbers, dead last in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Teams are throwing the ball 40 times per game against them. Something to be excited about when you talk about Geno Smith, when you talk about DK Metcalf, when you talk about Tyler Lockett. And just like I mentioned, DK, Lockett, 2 guys I'm going to be starting this week. Jackson Smith and Jigba, consistency-wise, volume-wise, target share-wise, I just can't quite get there. It is an interesting potential play for you. I don't know if you're dealing with injuries or what it might be. You could start Jackson Smith and Jigba this week just because, again, pass volume should be picked up quite a bit. I'm just not quite there. I want to see and ensure that Geno Smith is playing as well if I'm going to be playing. Jackson Smith and Jigba is in the spot, but again, could play him. I lean against it just with the guys that are in front of him that he's competing with. The Eagles, same old, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, going to be great starts for you. All right, that's every matchup in fantasy football for Week 15, helping you set your lineups at that wide receiver spot. If you guys have questions about any of these players, please do drop them below in the comment section. Would love to answer you guys and chat with you guys there. And if you're looking for last-minute advice before the start of these games on Saturday and Sunday, we're live on the OwnersBox Sports Twitch channel at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll include the link to our Twitch in the description. Come hang out with us there, ask any questions. We also just review the entire slate yet again from just fantasy, betting, everything there. So appreciate you guys for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please do hit that like button, and we will see you on the next one.